Captain Jason's boots crunched against the dry, rocky ground of the alien planet. The air felt thin, cold, and unfamiliar. He had been part of a special mission, a routine scouting job, or so they thought, until things went wrong. Very wrong. His squad had been ambushed. They were outnumbered, and the unknown alien forces attacked quickly. The other soldiers scattered in all directions, and Jason, the only one left, found himself alone in the vast wilderness. His radio was dead, and there was no sign of any backup. Jason's heart pounded in his chest as he moved cautiously through the strange, glowing terrain. His weapon was ready, but his eyes were constantly scanning the dark shadows that seemed to stretch endlessly around him. It was too quiet, too eerie. He had heard stories about these alien worlds. Some said the planets were beautiful but dangerous. Others said the creatures that lived here were deadly. Jason didn't know who or what was out there, but he didn't have a choice. He had to keep moving. The alien landscape was strange, almost otherworldly. Giant plants that seemed to glow in different shades of blue and purple stretched toward the sky. The ground beneath his feet was a mixture of cracked soil and glowing stones, making the whole place feel like something out of a nightmare. Jason stopped near a large boulder, crouching down to catch his breath. He wiped sweat from his forehead and looked around, trying to figure out his next move. But the silence was starting to feel heavy, almost suffocating. He couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was watching him. Suddenly, a rustling sound came from behind him, followed by the soft echo of footsteps. Jason spun around, his weapon raised instinctively. His eyes widened in shock as a figure stepped out of the shadows. It wasn't an enemy soldier or a hostile alien. No, it was something else entirely. Standing before him was a woman, tall with long, flowing hair that shimmered with an unnatural glow. She was dressed in a sleek, silver-like armor. Her skin had a faint, otherworldly tint, and her eyes were like nothing Jason had ever seen before. They glowed a brilliant shade of blue, almost glowing like stars in the night sky. Jason's heart raced. Who was she? And what was she doing here? The woman didn't move at first, watching him with a calm, almost unreadable expression. For a moment, neither of them said a word. Jason could hear the faint beating of his own heart in the stillness. Finally, she spoke. "You're lost, human." Her voice was smooth, yet filled with an authority that sent a chill down his spine. She spoke in perfect English, but there was something haunting about the way she said it. Jason kept his weapon raised, but he didn't fire. He wasn't sure why. Maybe it was because she hadn't attacked him. Maybe it was because, despite her alien appearance, there was something familiar in the way she looked at him. Something almost curious. "Who are you?" Jason demanded, trying to keep his voice steady. "Where's my team? What do you want from me?" The woman took a step closer, her eyes never leaving his. "I am Princess Lyra, daughter of the alien king. And I've been watching you, human soldier." Jason blinked, shocked by her words. The alien king's daughter. This was a royal. But why would she be here? And why would she speak to him? Before he could ask more questions, she continued, her voice softening. "You're not like the others. I have chosen you, human. I want you to be my mate." Jason's jaw dropped. His mate. What was she talking about? Was this some kind of joke? He stared at her, unsure whether to laugh or draw his weapon. But there was no time for either. A strange tension filled the air, as if her words held a much deeper meaning. Jason opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. He couldn't understand why the daughter of the alien king would want a human soldier like him. He was just a soldier, a small part of a much larger war. But her eyes told him something different. She wasn't lying. "Come with me," she said, her voice no longer as commanding, but softer, almost pleading. "There's much you need to understand. You have a role to play in the fate of both our worlds." Jason stood frozen, his mind racing. He had no idea what she meant by that, but something inside him told him that this moment would change everything. He was standing face to face with the alien king's daughter, and his life was about to take a turn he could never have imagined. Jason's mind raced as Princess Lyra led him deeper into the hidden underground lair. The air inside was cool and heavy, filled with the scent of metallic alloys and strange alien plants. The walls shimmered with intricate symbols, and every corner of the place was lit by a soft, pulsating glow. It looked like something out of a futuristic dream. Jason had been a soldier for most of his life, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. The tension between them was palpable. He still had no idea what the princess's true motives were or why she had chosen him, a simple human soldier, as her mate. But one thing was certain: he had to trust her, at least for now. "Where are we going?" Jason asked, his voice low as he tried to keep his senses sharp. The quiet hum of the underground base was unnerving, making every sound feel amplified. Lyra glanced back at him, her glowing eyes soft with an unreadable expression. "To my father's chambers." Jason's stomach tightened. "The alien king?" he asked. "Why there? What does he have to do with this?" She stopped in front of a large door, which opened with a soft hiss. "Everything," she replied, her tone now tinged with sadness. "You are part of something much bigger than you understand, human. My father will not allow our bond to happen. He has already arranged my marriage to another, one from a rival faction of our kind. But I have chosen you." The door opened into a large, grand chamber, and Jason's eyes widened at the sight. The walls were lined with alien technology, their forms and shapes unlike anything he had seen on Earth. At the far end of the room sat a massive throne, where the alien king himself waited, his posture regal, his face obscured by shadows. "Father," Lyra began, her voice calm yet filled with a quiet defiance, "I've chosen my mate, and it's a human soldier." Jason stood at the entrance, unsure of what to expect. He had imagined many things, but facing the ruler of an alien empire was beyond anything he had ever prepared for. The alien king's presence was overwhelming. His towering figure radiated power and authority, and even though he sat in silence, Jason could feel the weight of his gaze. The alien king's voice broke the silence, deep and commanding. "You have chosen a human daughter." His tone was chilling. "You disappoint me. He is nothing more than a weak, insignificant creature." Jason clenched his fists. He wasn't sure whether the king was speaking to him or his daughter, but the contempt in his words stung. He had to keep his cool. There was no way out now. He had to figure out what was really going on. "He is not weak, father," Lyra replied boldly, stepping forward. "He's strong in ways you cannot understand. You cannot control him as you have controlled me. The bond we share is powerful, and it is not something you can break." The alien king stood up slowly, his massive form towering over them both. The room seemed to shake with his presence, and his eyes glowed with an unearthly light. "You do not understand the consequences of this choice." He narrowed his eyes at Jason. "Your kind has no place in this galaxy. You are mere insects to be crushed beneath our boots. But my daughter, she always was the rebellious one." Jason was about to speak when Lyra suddenly stepped in front of him. "I don't care what you think, father." Her voice was firm. "I have made my decision, and no one will change it." A low, rumbling laugh escaped the alien king. "Very well, daughter. But know this, you are about to find out just how dangerous your choice truly is." Before Jason could process what was happening, the ground beneath them trembled. The air turned thick with energy, and Jason felt his entire body tense. He could sense something dark was coming. A low hum filled the room, and a terrifying presence surged in from the corners. "You will regret this, Lyra," the king warned, his voice laced with venom. "And your human soldier will pay the price." Suddenly, a series of loud bangs echoed through the room, and the doors behind them burst open. Alien soldiers, heavily armored and armed, stormed into the chamber, weapons aimed at Jason. Lyra moved quickly, her hand glowing with energy as she summoned a shield around them. "No," she shouted. "You will not take him." The soldiers hesitated, clearly unsure of how to respond to their princess. The alien king's eyes flashed with fury. "You think your powers can stop me?" he sneered. "You are nothing without my approval. This human's fate is already sealed." Jason couldn't move. The intensity of the situation overwhelmed him. He was caught between two powerful beings, the alien king, whose wrath seemed unstoppable, and Lyra, who was risking everything for him. The shield she had created flickered, and Jason could see the exhaustion in her face. This was too much for her. "We need to leave now," Jason shouted. But before they could react, the alien king raised his hand. A violent pulse of energy shot out from his palm, hitting Lyra's shield and shattering it into pieces. She cried out in pain, falling to her knees. Jason dove forward, grabbing her just as she collapsed, but their enemies were closing in fast. There was no way out. Jason's heart pounded in his chest as the alien king's soldiers closed in. Lyra, weakened and vulnerable, lay in his arms, her energy drained from the force of her father's attack. The room was thick with tension. Jason could barely keep his grip on her as more soldiers surrounded them, their weapons aimed with deadly precision. The alien king stood at the center, watching them with cold, calculating eyes. His presence alone seemed to fill the room, a suffocating weight that made it hard for Jason to think clearly. "You will regret this, Lyra." The king's voice boomed with authority. "You're throwing everything away for a human. Do you truly believe he can save you?" Jason gritted his teeth, refusing to let fear take control. He had to protect her. He had no idea how, but he couldn't let the king have his way. Not now, not after everything they had been through. Just as the soldiers raised their weapons, preparing to strike, a loud, shrill alarm rang through the chamber. It was sharp and piercing, echoing through the walls like a warning signal. The king's expression faltered for a moment. His eyes flicked to the ceiling. Something was happening. Without warning, a loud crash shook the room. The ceiling above them cracked open, sending shards of stone falling to the ground. The soldiers recoiled, weapons raised defensively. Then, before anyone could react, a group of shadowy figures dropped from the hole in the ceiling, moving with swift precision. Jason barely had time to register what was happening before the alien soldiers were being pushed back by the newcomers. These weren't the king's elite forces. They wore ragged armor, and their faces were obscured by masks. But their movements were quick, calculated, and deadly. "Get them out of here," one of the masked figures shouted, his voice sharp and urgent. "We don't have much time." Jason blinked, still in disbelief, as one of the figures rushed toward him. Without waiting for any explanation, the figure grabbed Lyra and motioned for him to follow. Jason hesitated for only a moment before sprinting after them, grabbing Lyra's limp form and pulling her along with him. The masked rebels led them through a series of tunnels and hidden passageways. Jason couldn't keep track of where they were going. The underground complex felt like a maze, but the urgency in their steps told him they didn't have much time. Lyra stirred in his arms, her voice weak. "We have to hurry. The king will send everything after us." Jason nodded, his heart racing. He had no idea who these rebels were or what they wanted, but they had saved them. For now, that was enough. They reached a hidden exit just as the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the hallways. The rebels pushed open a door leading to a narrow alleyway. As they stepped into the cold night air, Jason took a deep breath, the outside world feeling strange after so long in the alien fortress. "You're safe for now," one of the rebels said, turning toward Jason and Lyra. "But not for long." Jason glanced at the masked figure. "Who are you people? What do you want?" The rebel grinned, though it was hidden behind his mask. "We're the resistance. We're fighting for the freedom of all species under the king's rule. And right now, we've got one mission: to get you two somewhere safe." Lyra looked up at Jason, her eyes filled with exhaustion and worry. You have to trust them, Jason. They're our only chance. Jason wasn't sure what to think, but one thing was clear. Lyra was right. They were in danger, and the king wasn't going to stop until he had both of them back under his control. This new alliance, though mysterious, might be their only hope. Where are we going? Jason asked, his voice low. The rebel leader paused for a moment, glancing over his shoulder at the distant sound of footsteps. We're heading to the safe house. It's the last place the king's forces will think to look. There, you can regroup, figure out your next move. Jason nodded, taking a moment to process everything. The king's wrath had only just begun. They didn't have much time. They needed to be ready for whatever came next. As they began to move through the dark streets, Jason couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The city was still alive with activity, the lights flickering and the distant hum of alien technology filling the air. It was all so strange, so foreign. But amidst it all, one thing was clear. This war was far from over. The resistance was their only chance now, and Jason had no idea what kind of battle lay ahead. Jason followed the rebels through the dark streets, his mind racing with questions. They had barely escaped the grasp of the alien king, but now they were headed toward a new unknown, the safe house. The dimly lit alleyways and alien architecture felt more oppressive with each step. The walls, covered in strange markings and glowing symbols, seemed to shift as if alive. He was a soldier, trained for combat, but nothing about this was like anything he had prepared for. The rebel leader, whose face remained hidden behind a mask, glanced over his shoulder every now and then, ensuring no one was following them. The atmosphere was tense, thick with the weight of what had just happened. Jason couldn't shake the feeling that the whole world was closing in around him. The alien king's forces were relentless, and even though they had gotten away this time, Jason knew they wouldn't stop. As they walked, Lyra stumbled slightly, her energy still drained from the confrontation with her father. Jason instinctively moved closer to her, steadying her. Her glowing blue eyes met his briefly, filled with both exhaustion and determination. She was fighting something much bigger than just her father's will. She was fighting for her own future, for freedom, and for something she wasn't yet ready to fully understand. Jason could feel the weight of it all, pressing down on both of them. They reached a nondescript building, a simple, quiet structure that looked like it had been abandoned for years. But the rebels had a hidden entrance, a secret passage that led them inside. The moment they stepped through the threshold, Jason felt an odd sense of relief, though it didn't last long. The interior of the safe house was a stark contrast to the chaotic world outside. It was clean, organized, and filled with the hum of alien technology, though it felt more like a sanctuary than a military base. Rebel soldiers moved in and out, tending to equipment, checking communications, and preparing for whatever came next. Jason felt like a fish out of water. Lyra was escorted to a small room, where the rebel medic immediately began tending to her. Jason watched for a moment before the rebel leader, the same masked figure who had helped them escape, approached him. "You must have a lot of questions, soldier." Jason nodded. "You're right about that. Who are you? Why did you help us? And what's really going on here?" The rebel leader glanced around, ensuring they were alone. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, he removed his mask, revealing the face of a man not much older than Jason. His features were sharp, and his eyes, though weary, held a sense of purpose. "My name is Zarek," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "We're part of the Resistance, a group dedicated to ending the tyranny of the alien king. You see, the king's rule isn't as it seems." Jason raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Zarek took a deep breath, as though deciding how much to reveal. "The alien king, the one you've seen, he isn't the ruler of all our people. The kingdom he controls is just a part of a much larger empire, a far-reaching force that has kept countless worlds under its thumb for centuries." Jason was listening intently. This was bigger than anything he had imagined. "There's a reason Lyra chose you, Jason. You're not just a soldier in the wrong place at the wrong time. You're here for a reason, one tied to an ancient prophecy. Jason blinked. A prophecy? What do you mean? Zarek hesitated for a moment, clearly weighing the gravity of his words. The people of this galaxy, our species, Lyra's people, and others, are tied by a long-forgotten prophecy. It speaks of a hybrid warrior who will unite the alien races, break the cycle of oppression, and lead the galaxy into a new age. That warrior is you, Jason. Jason stared at him, stunned. Me? I'm just a soldier. What does any of this have to do with me? Zarek smiled sadly. I understand your confusion, but the truth is, you've been chosen by the stars. Lyra's bond with you, this connection you share, it's not just personal. It's the key to everything. The prophecy is tied to the union of human and alien. You and Lyra are the catalyst. Together, you can end the king's reign. But it won't be easy. The king will do anything to stop it. Jason was silent, his mind swirling with disbelief and uncertainty. I never asked for any of this. I'm just a soldier on a mission. Now I'm supposed to be some prophecy. Zarek's expression softened. None of us choose our destiny, Jason. Sometimes destiny chooses us. And right now, you need to embrace what's coming, because the fate of countless lives rests on your shoulders. Jason took a deep breath, trying to absorb everything he had just heard. He wasn't sure what to believe, but one thing was clear. He couldn't walk away from this. Lyra had chosen him. The Resistance had placed their trust in him. And there was no turning back now. What's next? Jason asked, his voice steadying. Zarek gave a grim smile. We prepare for the war that's coming, and we make sure you're ready to fight. Just then, a loud crash echoed through the building, followed by the shrill sound of alarms blaring. Zarek's eyes widened. The king's forces are here. They found us. Jason's heart raced. There was no more time for questions. The Resistance had been exposed, and the alien king's wrath would be felt soon enough. The next battle had already begun. The air inside the safe house shifted. What had been a quiet refuge only moments ago was now charged with urgency. Jason could hear the distant sound of heavy footsteps and the rhythmic clanging of metal against stone. The alien king's forces were closing in fast. The rebels scrambled, grabbing weapons and preparing for the oncoming assault. Panic and adrenaline swept through the room, but there was no time for hesitation. We need to move, now. Zarek barked, his voice cutting through the chaos. Get to the escape tunnels. Everyone, go. Jason's pulse quickened as he grabbed Lyra, who was still recovering from the injuries inflicted by her father's energy blast. She had regained some strength, but it was clear that she was still weak. Every step she took seemed to cost her something, and Jason hated seeing her like this. He couldn't afford to lose her, not now. Zarek led them down a narrow hallway, his movements fluid and practiced as he pushed open a hidden door that revealed a series of twisting tunnels beneath the city. The tunnels were dark, lit only by flickering lights embedded in the walls. Jason didn't know how far they were from the surface or how deep the enemy had infiltrated, but he knew they were running out of time. As they moved deeper into the tunnels, the sound of approaching soldiers grew louder. The walls seemed to close in on them, and every creak of the floorboards felt like it might be their last. Jason's heart raced, but his focus remained on Lyra. She stumbled again, and this time Jason caught her, holding her firmly as they continued forward. We're almost there, Zarek said, though his voice held little reassurance. But we have to keep moving. If they find us in these tunnels, we're finished. Jason nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. This wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a battle for freedom. He couldn't let the king's forces win, not when the entire future of the galaxy was at stake. The prophecy, the rebellion, Lyra's trust in him, all of it hung on this moment. They reached a small chamber at the end of the tunnel. The air here was musty and stale, but it was safe, for now. Zarek motioned for them to stop. "This is it," he said, breathing heavily. "We'll regroup here for a moment, catch our breath. But we can't stay long." Jason gently lowered Lyra to the ground, his mind still spinning. "We have to fight back, Zarek. We can't just run." Zarek met his gaze, his expression grave. "You don't understand, Jason. We're outnumbered, and we need time to strategize. We can't win this war if we're dead." Jason clenched his fists. He didn't want to run, but he knew Zarek was right. They needed a plan. And in that moment, as the distant sound of enemy boots echoed through the tunnels, Jason realized just how dire the situation was. It was no longer just about him and Lyra. It was about the survival of everyone who believed in freedom. Lyra's voice broke through his thoughts, soft but filled with a surprising strength. "Jason, you have to trust them." He turned to look at her, his concern evident. "Trust who?" "The resistance. Your father's forces are closing in. We can't just wait around and hope for the best." Lyra's glowing blue eyes met his, steady and sure. "The resistance is our best chance. The war against my father. It's bigger than you think. You're part of this now, Jason." Jason hesitated, the weight of her words pressing down on him. The choice wasn't just his anymore. He was in this fight for the long haul, whether he was ready or not. But could he truly trust the resistance, or was there more to this rebellion than Zarek and his crew were letting on? Suddenly, the sound of something heavy crashing through the tunnel walls echoed through the chamber. Jason's eyes widened in panic as dust and debris filled the air. The enemy was closer than he thought. "They're here," Zarek shouted, rushing to the far side of the room. "Prepare yourselves." The rebel soldiers sprang into action, taking up positions and readying their weapons. Jason grabbed a blaster from a nearby crate and handed it to Lyra, who took it with a look of resolve in her eyes. She was still weak, but the fire in her gaze was unmistakable. She wasn't giving up. Neither was he. "We have one chance to stop them. If we don't, they'll tear through this entire resistance." Zarek's voice was calm, but edged with urgency. He turned to Jason, his eyes searching for something. "You're not just a soldier anymore, Jason. You're part of this fight. Show us what you've got." Jason nodded, feeling the weight of his newfound role settle over him. He wasn't just a human soldier anymore. He was something bigger, part of a galaxy-spanning conflict, bound by a prophecy he didn't fully understand. But if he was going to survive this, he had to step up. For Lyra, for the resistance, for the future. The sound of heavy boots grew louder. Jason took a deep breath, readying himself for what was to come. There was no going back now. The moment the door crashed open, the world seemed to slow down. Jason's heart pounded in his chest, adrenaline coursing through his veins. There was no more time for thinking, no more time for doubts. The alien king's soldiers flooded into the chamber, their weapons gleaming with deadly intent. The rebels took their positions, but there was no denying the truth. This was going to be a hard fight. "Get down," Zarek shouted, diving to the floor and pulling out a plasma rifle. "Stay low. They have heavy artillery." Jason barely had time to react before the first blast hit the far wall, sending shards of rock and metal scattering in every direction. He ducked instinctively, pulling Lyra to the ground with him. Her hand tightened around his wrist, and despite her exhaustion, her eyes gleamed with a quiet resolve. "We fight together, Jason," she whispered. The weight of her words settled in his chest. This wasn't just a battle of survival. It was a battle for everything they stood for. For freedom, for the galaxy's future, and above all, for each other. The rebels opened fire, their weapons sending bright pulses of light into the advancing soldiers. But it was clear, the king's forces were too well equipped, too numerous. The rebels were outgunned and outnumbered, but they fought like warriors possessed. Jason, with no formal combat training, felt out of place, but the sheer intensity of the moment pushed him into action. "Lyra, stay down," Jason yelled, moving to the front line with a blaster in hand. The sound of laser fire rang through the air, and Jason barely dodged a near miss as a soldier took aim at him. He fired back, hitting one of the soldiers in the chest. The alien dropped, but there were more. Always more. It felt like they would never stop coming. The rebels were holding their ground, but it was clear the king's forces were too much for them. Jason could see the determination on Zerek's face as he fought fiercely, but there was a desperation in his eyes. They were losing ground, and fast. Suddenly, a massive explosion erupted behind them, throwing Jason off his feet and sending him crashing to the ground. The blast was deafening, the force of it knocking the air from his lungs. He groaned, struggling to get up, but his vision was blurry. Through the haze, he could see Lyra, barely holding on to consciousness as she tried to crawl toward him. Jason. Lyra's voice was weak, but it cut through the chaos. He scrambled toward her, reaching out and pulling her into his arms. The world felt like it was spinning, and he could barely focus on what was happening around them. The rebels were still fighting, but the situation was getting worse by the second. "We have to get out of here," Zarek shouted, struggling to stand. His face was smeared with blood, but his eyes were focused. "This whole place is going to collapse if we don't leave now." Jason nodded, determination filling him. There was no choice. They couldn't win this fight, not here, not now. They had to escape. They had to survive. "Lyra, are you okay?" Jason asked urgently, his hands shaking as he checked her injuries. Her wounds weren't life-threatening, but the bloodstains on her clothes told a different story. She was barely holding on. "I'm fine," she whispered, though her face was pale. "We just need to get to the tunnels. The resistance needs us." Jason didn't wait for her to finish. He scooped her into his arms, ignoring the weight of her body and the increasing danger around them. They had to make it out. There was no other choice. The rebels fought valiantly, but they were quickly being overrun. The king's soldiers were advancing on all sides, and the explosion had thrown their defenses into disarray. Zarek was shouting orders, trying to coordinate the remaining soldiers, but Jason knew they couldn't hold out much longer. "This way," Zarek motioned, his voice filled with urgency. "Follow me." With no time to lose, Jason ran, his mind focused only on one thing: getting them to safety. The walls of the chamber were crumbling, and the distant sound of reinforcements pouring in told him that their window of escape was closing fast. They made their way through the maze-like corridors, each step feeling heavier as the seconds ticked by. The sounds of battle echoed through the hallways, but they were too far gone to help now. They had to escape, or everything they fought for would be lost. "Hurry," Zarek urged, his voice almost frantic. They turned a corner and saw the entrance to the escape tunnels ahead. But just as they reached it, the ground beneath them shook violently. Dust and debris rained down as the building groaned under the force of the attack. "No," Jason shouted, pushing himself harder. Lyra's head lolled against his chest, and he could feel her weakening with each passing moment. "We're almost there." The doors to the tunnel entrance slammed open, and Zarek led them inside. The tunnels were narrow, damp, and dark, but it was their only chance. As the last of the rebels filed into the underground passage, Jason heard the unmistakable sound of the building collapsing behind them. The alien king's forces had destroyed their refuge. They had escaped, barely. But as Jason carried Lyra further into the tunnel, a heavy weight settled in his chest. They had won this battle, but the war was far from over. The air was thick with tension as Jason and Lyra, along with the remaining rebels, navigated the winding tunnels beneath the alien city. The darkness pressed in on them, and the muffled sounds of the crumbling building above seemed like distant echoes in the deep underground passages. The explosions, the screams, the chaos. They felt a world away now. But despite the temporary silence, Jason couldn't shake the feeling of impending doom. Lyra was still weak, but she refused to let go of his arm, her steps slow but determined. Jason kept a protective grip on her, his focus solely on getting them to safety. The journey through the tunnels felt endless, the walls closing in with every step they took. They couldn't stay here forever. The Alien King's forces would likely be searching every inch of these passages, and if they weren't careful, they would all be caught. Zarek, who was leading the way, turned back and gave them a grim look. "We need to keep moving." His voice, though strained, had a sense of purpose. The resistance had taken a major hit, but it wasn't over. Not yet. The deeper we go, the safer we'll be. But we need to find shelter and regroup before they catch up. Jason nodded, clenching his jaw. The fight wasn't over. It had barely begun. As they continued through the narrow passage, Jason found his mind racing. He thought back to the battle, the heat of the explosions, the roar of the alien soldiers, the overwhelming sense of being outnumbered. He had never faced anything like this before. He had fought for his country, but this was different. It wasn't just a battle for land, resources, or power. It was a battle for freedom, for an entire galaxy. And the weight of it all was suffocating. Lyra's voice broke through his thoughts, quiet but firm. "Jason, we're not alone in this fight." He looked down at her, surprised by the sudden strength in her tone. Despite her injuries, despite the horrors they had just endured, Lyra still believed. She still had hope. "I know," Jason said softly, his hand tightening around hers. "But what if we can't stop him? The king, he's too powerful. His army, they'll keep coming, won't they?" Lyra's eyes, though weary, shone with conviction. "We don't stop fighting. Not because we think we can win, but because we have to. This is our chance to change everything." Her words hit him like a wave. She was right. It wasn't about the odds anymore. It wasn't about what they could or couldn't do. It was about what they had to do. And in that moment, Jason realized that he wasn't just fighting for survival. He was fighting for the future of the galaxy. For freedom. For Lyra. And for the rebellion. The thought of the king, his iron grip on the galaxy, sent a chill down Jason's spine. The alien king wasn't just a ruler. He was a tyrant, a monster who cared nothing for the lives he destroyed. Jason had seen it firsthand. He couldn't allow it to continue. Just as the thought crossed his mind, a sharp, sudden sound rang out through the tunnel. Footsteps, heavy and fast. Jason's senses went on high alert, and he pulled Lyra closer, shielding her with his own body. Zarek turned sharply, his hand on the hilt of his blade. "They're here." A feeling of dread washed over Jason. They had been followed. Without a second thought, Zarek motioned for everyone to take cover in the shadows. The tunnel was dark, and their only advantage was the element of surprise. Jason crouched low, his heart pounding in his chest. The sound of the approaching soldiers grew louder, closer. He held his breath, barely daring to move. Lyra, sensing his tension, gripped his hand tightly. Her voice, low but steady, whispered, "We'll make it through this." Jason nodded, though doubt still lingered. The Alien King's soldiers were relentless. They couldn't stay hidden forever. Their position was compromised. But there was no other option. Fight or die. Suddenly, a harsh light pierced the darkness. The soldiers had reached the tunnel entrance. They were close, too close. "Stay quiet," Zarek muttered under his breath. "They're right outside. If we move now, we'll get caught. We need to wait for the right moment." Jason's grip on his blaster tightened, his mind racing for a plan. The soldiers were a few feet away, scanning the tunnel. There were only a few of them, but they were armed with high-tech weapons, and there was no telling how many more were coming. They had to move. Now. Zarek didn't wait for another moment. He made a sharp motion, signaling for everyone to advance. In an instant, the rebels leaped from their hiding spots, taking the soldiers by surprise. A quick, brutal skirmish broke out in the dimly lit tunnel. Jason moved swiftly, taking down one soldier with a precise shot. His pulse steady, though his nerves were on edge. Lyra wasn't far behind, using the blaster with impressive accuracy, though she moved with caution. Despite the intensity of the moment, Jason couldn't help but feel a sense of pride in her. She wasn't just the daughter of the alien king. She was a warrior in her own right. The fight didn't last long. With Zarek's leadership and the surprise attack, the soldiers were quickly subdued. But Jason knew this was just a small victory in the larger war. "We need to move faster," Zarek said, wiping sweat from his brow. "This was only a scouting party. The main force will be here soon." Jason nodded, feeling the weight of their situation growing heavier. They were running out of time, and with every passing moment, the stakes became higher. But even as the pressure mounted, Jason knew one thing for sure: he wasn't backing down. No matter what the future held, he would fight to the end. For Lyra, for the galaxy, for everything that was at risk.